What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my team selection for Game Week 5. So I'm going to show you how the team is set up and thoughts on how I'm going to use my 2 free transfers this week and why I might not need to wildcard in Game Week 6, even though that's been the plan up until this point. And of course, I'll run you through how I did in Game Week 4 as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with how I did in Game Week 4. And it wasn't the best game week that I'm ever going to have, but compared to what a lot of people scored this week, it actually wasn't that bad. I got 55 points, which was enough to move me from 2.1 million to 1.9. So not an overall rank that I'm hoping to have by the end of the season, but Game Week 38 is a long way off, and at least it's another green arrow. So since the terrible start in Game Week 1, it's been green arrows every week, which isn't difficult when you're in the millions, but it's still nice to be moving up. Part of the reason I did well is because I had Haaland captain. Another 2 goals. I always thought he was going to start. I was like 99.99% sure. And obviously Brentford at home was a good fixture. So another 2 goals, another 3 bonus points. And obviously Salah blanked, which was really helpful. That's not going to happen that often. I think most weeks Haaland and Salah are probably going to return. But it was good for me this week. In terms of the other players that actually got me points, there weren't many. Bruno Fernandes assist against Southampton. Shame that he couldn't get more. But to be honest with you, watch that whole game. He didn't really have a huge amount of chances. But the assist was nice. It was a good cross for De Ligt. Saka got an assist for Gabriel's goal against Spurs. And then Smith Rowe got an assist as well. He went off before Fulham lost the clean sheet. And he picked up a bonus. So he and Saka both finished on 7. Fernandes on 5. Haaland on 13. Captain was 26. Everyone else blanked. So it wasn't a great week, but I still got a green arrow, so I'm pretty happy with that. I played Robinson again over Porro. I didn't think that I would get away with it 2 weeks in a row, but they both scored 2 points. Robinson lost his clean sheet in the 95th minute, which was an absolute killer. And then Henderson 1, Konza 1, Trent 1, Eze 2, Rodgers 2, and Isak 1 going off at half-time. It wasn't pretty, but it was okay. So I'm pretty happy with it. Let's see how we're lining up for Game Week 5. So I was finally able to roll a transfer in Game Week 4. So I've got 2 free transfers for Game Week 5. And I've still got that million in the bank just ready to be spent. And I'm actually quite happy with my defence this week. There's not really any major concerns. In goal, Dean Henderson is not great. No clean sheets for Crystal Palace so far. But I'm never going to be particularly worried about my goalkeeper. It's not going to be a priority to use a transfer on. That position will get changed when I've got nothing else to do or a wildcard. Up until that point, I just leave Dean Henderson in and just hope for the best, right? Also, like long term, I know Palace haven't done well defensively so far, but I look at that team and think it's pretty good. The clean sheets will eventually come, so there's maybe not a massive rush to get rid of him. But if I was wildcarding this week or next week, I definitely wouldn't have him. But in terms of using a transfer, it's just not something I'm particularly worried about. My back 3 is Konza against Wolves at home, Porro against Brentford at home, and Trent against Bournemouth at home. Again, not really any need to be concerned there. The only defenders that I may be missing is a second Liverpool one, but Porro versus Brentford and Konza versus Wolves is absolutely fine. And then obviously Arsenal defenders, but they play Man City away this week. Now, if you've got Arsenal defenders, you're probably considering playing them, and I completely get that. But there's no need to bring them in before they play Man City away and Erling Haaland, who's looked great so far in the league. So, defence good. I've got Robinson on the bench against Newcastle at home if I get stuck. Barco is still my 5th defender. Again, he's not really a problem that I'm concerned about until I wildcard. And at that point, obviously, I'll take him out. But until then, his price is locked, so he won't drop in price. And he's basically my last sub every single week. So there's not really too much more to say. Like, Aston Villa obviously haven't got a clean sheet so far. At least I don't think they have. Let me just double check that. Yeah, they've conceded in every game so far. But the expected goals conceded in the last couple against Everton and Leicester have been pretty promising. I think Wolves at home is a decent enough fixture. And even after that, if I needed to play him in Game Week 6, if I wasn't wildcarding, it's Ipswich away. So I'm kind of okay with Konza. I'm sure people have got more exciting defenders in that spot. But it's all about whether or not it's worth using a transfer on. I just don't think it is. And obviously, Porro I've benched for the last 2 weeks because of more difficult fixtures. Brentford at home looks a lot better. I'm not necessarily expecting a clean sheet for Spurs because I think the likes of Mbeumo will cause them problems. But it's a home fixture. We know how attacking he is, and Trent is just great. So I don't actually have anything more to say on that. I think my defence is fine. No need to use a transfer. Attack is a lot different though, so let's talk about that. So usually I talk about my midfielders and forwards separately, but with the transfers that I've got in mind for Game Week 5, I think it makes sense to talk about them all together. Plus, I'm not completely sure I'm going to wildcard in Game Week 6, so I want to talk about what the plans would be if I don't wildcard separately, which I'm going to do in a minute. But let's talk about how the attack is currently lined up with the intention to wildcard in Game Week 6. So Eze against Man United at home, Fernandes against Palace away, Saka against Man City away, and then Rodgers versus Wolves at home. That's my midfield 4. And then up front, João Pedro currently yellow flagged against Forest at home, Haaland against Arsenal at home, currently set as my captain, and then Isak versus Fulham away, also yellow flagged. But I've got Smith Rowe on the bench against Newcastle at home, so I do have cover. I'm not massively worried about the flags I've got, especially with 2 free transfers. Now, before I get onto the transfers that I'm thinking about making, let's just go through the players that are definitely staying. Haaland, doesn't matter what I do this week, he's going to be in the team. I definitely want him from Game Week 6, 7 moving forward, and I've already got a bit of value tied up in him. There's no point in me selling him to fund a move for Salah. I can do that in other ways. So Haaland stays. So does Morgan Rodgers. I know people are frustrated with him because it's 0 returns in the first 4 game weeks, and he has had a tendency so far to dodge points. But I just look at it as, I got him for 5 million. He keeps starting. He keeps getting good minutes. He's playing number 10 in a good attacking side. The returns will eventually come, and essentially he's just an 8th attacker that I rotate in every now and again or use for cover. I'm just not that worried about him. Not as worried as everyone else seems to be. So he's staying. And then so is Eze. Again, only 1 return in 4. Mateta's probably going to keep taking penalties. But I love players that are always going to start and that I have no concerns when the team sheet comes out. And Eze is one of those players, and the underlying stats are good. Now, he's not a complete lock for me forever or on wildcard in 6 because he has lost those penalties. Glasner did say that he and Mateta are kind of both potential takers, but I think Mateta will just keep taking them. I could be wrong on that. So he's not a lock for me, but I still like him. So Rodgers, Haaland, Eze definitely staying. On João Pedro, he wasn't in the Brighton squad last night against Wolves for the Carabao Cup game, which isn't great. I would have preferred him to have been in that squad to have a better, idea that he was going to start at the weekend. But it was quite a strong bench. And Hertzler said after the game that they didn't need to risk him. He also said that João Pedro had made a training session on Wednesday and they'd see how he does in training over the next couple of days. So there's a chance that he starts, but Hertzler doesn't strike me as a manager, from what we've heard so far, that is going to be massively open about whether or not João Pedro is going to start. Not that he would tell us he was going to start, but how available he is. Maybe I've got that wrong, and we'll see what he says in his press conference later this week. But I just think if there's any doubts there, I think it's fairly straightforward that I just play Smith Rowe instead. Like, João Pedro is great, and it'd be super frustrating to miss Forest and Ipswich at home. But Smith Rowe is also pretty good, so I could just play 3-5-2. So I'm not particularly worried about him. In terms of Fernandes, Saka and Isak, if I wildcard in Game Week 6, I've got 2 free transfers. I'm going to buy Salah and I'm going to captain him ahead of Haaland. Haaland is a perfectly reasonable captain this week. He's playing really well, but Arsenal is tricky, right? And I know people will talk about form, but look what happens when Man City have a tricky game in the Champions League against Inter Milan. Haaland blanks. It doesn't mean it's going to happen against Arsenal. He could well score, but it's not the type of fixture that I want to have a captain in, preferably. Now, if I don't buy Salah and I don't wildcard, I'll probably just captain Haaland because he's great, and I don't see a huge amount of other options in this team. But my plan, if I wildcard in 6, is to do Saka to Salah, and I've got to fund that. Now, originally, I was thinking keep Isak, sell Fernandes, and get like Matoma or Minter or, I don't know, Brereton Diaz before he plays Ipswich, or Szoboszlai and just get a double up on Liverpool attack without Jota or Diaz. But actually, Fernandes is fully fit and available, and he's definitely going to start against Palace. He's not yellow flagged. I've probably got to keep him. And I've got to be honest, I'm a little bit happy about that. But I think it makes sense. Objectively, it makes sense to keep Fernandes while Isak is yellow flagged. Now, it might be that Eddie Howe says he's fine, but he's not one of those managers that's going to give us much info. And apparently, Isak wasn't spotted in training yesterday, or at least he was in none of the training pictures. That doesn't mean that he's out, but he is a little bit of a doubt right now. So I think for me, as it stands, if I wildcard in 6, the moves would be to get Salah in, So if I do Saka to Salah, that leaves me having to find 1.7 million. And then I can just do Isak out for a 1 week punt for any forward up to 6.7 million. Now, who I go for, I'm not completely set on right now. If I was making a long-term move, I'd probably go for Calvert-Lewin, who's got Leicester away. But if it's a 1 week punt, I think I'd rather go for Vardy because he's at home. He hasn't had a huge amount of shots this season, even though he scored 2 goals. But I kind of just want to go there for one last Jamie Vardy party. If Unai Emery says that Watkins is unavailable, which I don't think is very likely, by the way, I think Watkins will be fine, then I'm definitely just getting Duran instead. No questions asked. But as it stands, I'm probably going to go for Jamie Vardy. I don't see a huge amount of other 6.7 million forwards to choose from. If João Pedro is definitely out, Welbeck will probably be on penalties. Because I think he took 1 or 2 in pre-season. So Welbeck against Forest is also an option. But I can shake the idea of going for Jamie Vardy. So that would probably be my current plan. If I wildcard in 6, I go for Saka to Salah, Vardy in to fund it. Doesn't take any hits. I captain Salah and then I wildcard out of it in game week 6. And what's quite nice is I checked the suggested transfers on Fantasy Football Hub. As always, links in the description if you want to check this out for yourself. 50% off at the moment still. And if you sign up and don't win your mini league, you will get your money back. Terms and conditions apply. All that good stuff. Links in the description below. But I checked the suggested transfers for my team. And if I don't wildcard, it wants to do Isak to Chris Wood as a longer term option. And that funds Robertson in for Barco. So it makes my squad better overall. But if you go to chip strategy at the bottom, you can put in what week you're going to wildcard. So if I put in game week 6 wildcard and this comes up, it then wants me to buy Salah, which basically is aligned with what I want to do anyway because of how good he is this week. And again, it's Isak to Chris Wood to fund it rather than selling Bruno Fernandes. So I like that aligns with what I want to do. I think Chris Wood as a long-term option is good, but I think as a 1 week punt in game week 5, I'd rather go for someone like Jamie Vardy with a home game or maybe Duran if Watkins is out. So that's my suggested transfers. If I wildcard, I will definitely be buying Salah. But could I just not wildcard? Let's talk about that. So the easiest way to show you why I'm considering not wildcarding in game week 6 is to run through what the team would look like over the next few game weeks and what the plan would be. So I've got my team in the My Team tool over on Fantasy Football Hub. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it easier. And essentially I'm set up in that 3-5-2 formation that I spoke about with Smith Rowe in the 11 and João Pedro on the bench. And if Isak was confirmed to be fit and available, I could potentially make no transfers this week. Remember that I've got 2. So if I roll in game week 5, I'm going to have 3 in game week 6 ahead of Arsenal's fixture swing. But of course, I wouldn't have Salah. Now, that's basically the key thing that I'm thinking about for my own team is how much do I want Salah this week? Because if I wildcard in 6, I definitely buy him. If I don't wildcard in 6, I'm going to have to go without him and just hope that Haaland captain does okay. Now, it might be that Haaland gets 1 goal, no bonus, finishes on 6 points, and Salah gets 10 points. In that case, I'd much rather save the wild card. But I'm picturing a scenario where Haaland blanks and Salah goes and gets 15 points plus. And in that case, I'd much rather just use the chip and just get the points this week and then set my team up next week for, the weeks that are still to come. But if I don't wildcard, I won't buy Salah this week. So I could just leave the team as it is. If João Pedro and Isak were both out, then the moves that I would make is Isak out for Calvert-Lewin, because like I said, I think he's a slightly better long-term pick than someone like Jamie Vardy. It's quite close, but I'd probably go for Calvert-Lewin if he's fit and available. He's flagged because he was ill for the Carabao Cup game. I'm pretty sure he's going to be fine, but obviously I could just buy someone else instead. And then I would do Smith Rowe out, who's fine this week, by the way, but I would get in Burmo, because I think him against Spurs on penalties is decent, and I definitely want in Burmo from game week 6. So if Isak was out, that is what I would do. 2 free transfers. I would ignore Salah, captain Haaland, and then the team this week still looks pretty good. And then when we move to game week 6, because I've sold Isak to Calvert-Lewin and not spent a huge amount of money doing Smith Rowe to Mbeumo, I've still got 2 million in the bank, and I've got 1 free transfer for game week 6. Now that move would be to buy another Arsenal player, because if I don't wildcard and I keep Saka rather than buying Salah, Saka is the only Arsenal player I've got in game week 6. So the move that I would make is Anthony Robinson out, and I would just buy Gabriel. If I wanted to play it mega safe, of course, I could just buy Saliba instead, but it's almost certain that I would buy Gabriel, and I'll just save that. So all of a sudden now, let me just put Gabriel in. probably instead of Porro. This is what my team would look like in game week 6, just using free transfers in theory, because of course injuries and suspensions can happen, right? But I'd have Henderson in goal against Everton away, Trent against Wolves away, Gabriel against Leicester at home, Konza against Ipswich away, Mbeumo against West Ham at home, Fernandes against Spurs at home, Rodgers against Ipswich away, Saka against Leicester at home, Eze against Everton away, Haaland against Newcastle away, and then Calvert-Lewin versus Palace at home. I think that team looks pretty good. Now, if I was wildcarding, I think a lot of that attack would be the same. I know people are going to have different preferences to me. Like, you wouldn't want Eze, you wouldn't want Fernandes. That is fine. But I'd be perfectly happy with that midfield 5 on wildcard. There's not a huge amount of players that I feel like I'm missing. Palmer, Son, fair enough. But to get them, I've got to sell Haaland or Saka. I don't want to do that. Haaland and Saka would be absolute locks on Game Week 6 wildcard for me. I can't fit Salah in because I want a Liverpool defender and an Arsenal one. And so there's not really many midfielders that I'm missing. Of course, I could have Bowen instead of Fernandes or something like that. Or even like, I don't know, Luis Diaz or Jota if you still want them. But I'm not particularly worried about them. So I think that team stands up really well to wildcarders. And the only thing I think I'm really missing is a different goalkeeper and maybe a third Arsenal player. And I think a lot of people on wildcard 6 will put Raya in goal. And obviously, that is much better than having Dean Henderson. But the thing is, and again, this is in theory if everything goes smoothly with injuries, when I get to game week 7, I've got Trent against Palace away, absolutely fine. Gabriel against Southampton at home. And then my choices are Konza versus Man United at home or Pedro Porro against Brighton away. Now, ideally, I'd have a better defender there, but I don't think playing Porro is the end of the world. And then I've got a spare transfer. So Dean Henderson could come out if I really want to make a goalkeeper transfer, and I could just put Flecken in instead. And I think on wildcard 6, that is going to be the main goalkeeper choice for people. Do you go for Flecken and 4.5, or do you spend the money and go for Raya? And if people are going to go for Flecken, I can get him by game week 7. Again, what's the major issue here? Flecken in goal, Wolves at home, Trent, Gabriel, Porro back 3. I've still got that midfield 5 of Eze, Saka, Rodgers, Fernandes, and Mbeumo. And then Calvert-Lewin against Newcastle at home and Haaland against Fulham at home in game week 7. I just think it stands up pretty well. Like, even when you get to like game week 8, you know, Trent, I'm always happy to play. Gabriel, Bournemouth away. Pedro Porro, West Ham at home. And again, that midfield 5 in the attack all looks pretty good. So for me, for my team, and your team might be set up different, I think sometimes even having just 1 or 2 players different can have a major impact on how you use your chips. For me, the big question is wildcarding in game week 6 worth it to get Salah captain this week? And it's not just to get him captain. I'm also taking out Saka against Man City away, who doesn't have a great fixture. So it's kind of a double impact there. Is it worth wildcarding to get Salah captain plus get rid of Saka to then get essentially the same midfield and attack and maybe a different goalkeeper in game week 6? That's the decider. I think it's like right now I think it's probably better not to wildcard, but I think I probably will because I'll want that captaincy. I'll be too afraid of Haaland blanking. And I guess the next question that people will have, well, if you don't wildcard in 6, when are you going to use it? I don't actually have another window. I just don't. But stuff will happen. Players will get injured. We'll get new information. You know, fixture swings in the future. There's always, like, your team is always going to look better when you wildcard. Of course it is. Game week 6 wildcarders teams will look better than mine. But then the hope would be that mine will look better in the future and that my current team will stand up pretty well. So I'm sure a lot of people watching this will say just get Salah and wildcard. It's pretty straightforward. And that is probably what I'll end up doing. But when I started looking at this on the tour and planning the future weeks, I think that team for game week 6 looks pretty great. Considering that's a non-wildcard team, I think it looks really good, apart from Dean Henderson. But he's playing Everton away. Like, it's not a major concern. I'm very tempted to go against I think a lot of people are wildcard in 6. I'm very tempted to go against it. Salah is great this week. I don't think I can look past it. Let me know what you think. I'm going to stop rambling there. But that's what I'm thinking about. If you want to check out the My Team tool, all the other tools that Hub have, links in the description. And by the way, if you just want to figure out wildcards and stuff, you can sign up for a month. You don't have to sign up yearly as well. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars if you listen on podcasts, and I'll be back tomorrow for final thoughts.